Wales has a new First Minister, a new cabinet and new government departments. But will the changes make any difference to the challenges facing our economy and our stretched public services? I'll also be joined live by Plaid Cymru leader Rhun ap Iorwerth after his party spring conference in Carnarvon. Welcome to Politics Wales. Bore da. Good morning, I'm Teleri Glyn-Jones. Well, there have been quite a few changes in Cardiff Bay this week. Vaughan Gething is confirmed as Wales's new First Minister, and he's announced who'll be joining him around the cabinet table. So before we get into the details, let's take a look at the new team. A new First Minister and a new cabinet. This week, Vaughan Gething marking a new era on the steps of the Welsh Government's offices in Cathays Park. But it was more of a reshuffle than a relaunch, with many familiar faces remaining at the top table. His leadership opponent, Jeremy Miles, drops education and picks up the economy and energy brief on top of his Welsh language responsibilities. Lynn Neagle, the MS for Torfaen, takes on the mantle of education. A long-standing critic of the Welsh Government's transport policies, Ken Skates becomes Cabinet Secretary for Transport and North Wales. The enormous Department for Climate Change, led by Julie James, has been broken up, with Hiraeth Davies becoming the Climate Change and Rural Affairs Secretary. And the biggest surprise? Despite suggesting she was ready for a new challenge, Eluned Morgan stays at Health. The opposition parties say it signals more of the same.
Well, the most exciting thing that came out of this reshuffle was people talking, he's calling them cabinet secretaries rather than ministers. Now, that tells you a lot about the ambition of this Vaughan Gething government. And what we've seen is the same faces, just with new titles, being put forward. And when you look at their delivery record in their previous portfolios, it's hardly anything to write home about.
It's a new chapter for Welsh politics under new leadership, but with many of the same challenges with funding, the NHS and a lagging economy. How different will it be? Unfortunately, none of those government ministers were available to come on the programme this morning, but I was joined in the studio earlier by Ruth Mosalski, political editor at WalesOnline, and Matt Hexter, host of the Hiraeth podcast and a former Labour staffer. And I started by asking Ruth if there were many surprises in the new cabinet.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk last week, as you'd expect. Politicians love these sort of discussions and the sort of rumour mill, and it was lots of people hanging around the Senedd canteen last week really wanting to talk about it. Some of the names that we were told might be going in, that didn't happen. Some of the ones that we expected to maybe go, depending on how unhappy they were about the process. So Julie James, for example, came out on the day of the announcement for Welsh Labour leader and was clearly unhappy with the way things had been done. She was a Jeremy Miles supporter, but she's still there in the cabinet. So any of the big sort of shocks about people that might leave, say her or Eluned Morgan, that didn't materialise into anything. We know all the names that are there. You know, it's not a big group they're picking from. This isn't Westminster where you've got hundreds of people.
We've got a couple of new names, haven't we? Hiraeth Davies, Cabinet Secretary for Climate Change and Rural Affairs, and Jane Bryant. Yeah,
so Jane Bryant was a co-chair of Vaughan Gething's campaign, so you'd expect her to get a job. Ken Skates also was, and he's back in the cabinet. Hiraeth Davies was previously in the cabinet, so he's coming back in. There was a lot of questions about who'd get that rural affairs farming brief, given all the protests and things going on about the replacement funding at the moment. So it's not really a surprise Hiraeth Davies got it. He's got a background there. People were fairly confident. That was one of the names that was being touted quite early on and came true.
Matt, we'll turn to you next then. You know, what does the fact that there hasn't been that much change tell us about what's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think everyone was expecting a bit of a broader, wider-ranging reshuffle a couple of weeks ago, but I think it reflects, one, the fact that the election result was very tight, but also that the party itself has been a little bit fractious over the last couple of weeks relating to the issues of donations of Vaughan Gething's campaign. And I think, to be fair to Vaughan, it's quite a shrewd set of appointments because, like Ruth says, it rewards sort of key players within his campaign, whilst also offering olive branches to Jeremy's side of the campaign, but also through the hire of Jane Hutt as Chief Whip in Trefnydd, an experienced figure who can provide stability to that government, but also Keeley is on the left of the party, so can start to bring the party back together a bit before a general election campaign.
Would it have looked very different, do you think, if the margin of victory was greater? Would he have had to pay, you know, would Jeremy Miles have had that kind of, the power there to kind of call the shots as much? Would he have been able to put him in health, for example, which is the big question, probably what most people expected, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people were expecting a Jeremy Miles and Lynette Morgan swap, really, before the announcement on Thursday evening. But as Ruth said, there's not a huge group of people from whom you can pick. So whilst we say it would have been a bit more of a wider-ranging reshuffle, what we're essentially saying is there would have maybe been 2 or 3 additional faces in there. But fundamentally, you have only a certain amount of people you can pick from in that group.
Ruth, you're always plugged in. What are you hearing about whether or not Eluned, how was she offered the job? Was it offered to Jeremy Miles?
Eluned Morgan made it fairly clear that if she was offered a different job, she'd have taken it. She told various news outlets that she was...
I think there was a collective sigh of sympathy for Eluned Morgan when it was announced.
I think the most common text I had last week were the words "poor Eluned" once the reshuffle was announced. So she's kept the health job. She's been in it for a number of years. Vaughan Gething did try to shoot down, I think, your colleague when he asked him on reshuffle day, was anyone else offered the health job? And Vaughan Gething said no. I'm told differently. I believe your colleagues were told differently as well. A number of sources have said that no, that isn't true. Jeremy Miles was offered it and turned it down. Whether we'll ever find that out, we might have to wait a long number of years to find that out when there's a memoirs in many, many years to come. Who knows?
And we'll definitely be reading them.
It'll be one of our memoirs. So, but it just plays into that thing. You've now got Eluned Morgan with the biggest job in the cabinet. It's the toughest job. There are more problems with health, than we could name in an hour-long programme. She's now got to get to grips with that and go again on it. In some ways, that continuity is good. You're not a new minister like you've got with some of the other portfolios. You've got a new minister going in now and having to get a grip of these. So Hugh Rankin-Davies with the farming problem, for example. He's got to come in now and make really big strides. Eluned Morgan knows what she's got to do. She's just got to carry on doing it. There's a slight thing there that we all know if you don't want to do something, it's possibly a little bit harder to motivate yourself.
Perhaps. Matt, I was going to ask you initially about the fact that the climate change brief has been broken up, what that tells us, whether that's kind of just a practical thing because it's too big, or whether that sets out a new, different agenda to what we had from Mark Drakeford.
I think it can be both. I think everybody thought that climate change portfolio, when it was created, was too big and had too many responsibilities therein. But also, I do think there is an aspect of... whilst I won't say that climate change will be ignored by this government, certainly the key drivers of climate change policy within the last government were Mark Drakeford and Lee Waters, and neither of them are there this time. So, take, for example, energy being moved with economy. I think that shows to me that this Welsh government will view energy as an economic driver rather than something necessarily exclusively to tackle climate change. And I think that there's an important fact that climate change is still within the name of the ministry that Hugh Rankin-Davies will have. I think, rightfully, if the Welsh Government had no minister or cabinet secretary for climate change, they could have very easily been lampooned for that, saying they're ignoring climate change. I think it is key that title remains there, but we will have to wait and see what happens with the ministerial responsibilities before we work out exactly who's responsible for what.
We've had one indication this morning, haven't we, about the direction of travel. Ken Skates was on our sister programme, Sunday Supplement, on Radio Wales earlier this morning. A controversial appointment to a certain extent because he has been very critical of Welsh Government transport policy in the past and seemed to be suggesting, at least, that the roads review was under review. Although, Ruth, what did you make of that? It
was as near as an answer as I think we get from a politician. He was asked, is there, is road building back on the table? And he didn't rule it out. It wasn't a, no, we're sticking with that policy. Ken Skates, after the road freeze, the policy of freezing new road building was brought in, came out and said, that's not right. You haven't spoken to people about this. You need to speak to people. He was telling Sunday Supplement this morning, I'm going to be listening to everyone. I want to listen to councillors, to business people, to residents. He was asked specifically about 2 schemes in North Wales and the M4 relief road.
I said they were back in the ring?
He said they were back in the ring. He said that the 2 specific North Wales ones were on his table for consideration, which is more leeway than we've had at any point in the last few years by any of these schemes.
And it sounded like there might be reconsidering of the criteria, wasn't there? So that specific one about leading to more congestion or leading to more capacity would be reconsidered. That seems quite major.
Under the previous administration, with the M4 relief road, for example, they'd said it was on environmental green grounds, they would turn it down, and cost was a big factor. Ken Skates made it really clear today, it's cost. It will be too expensive with the current state of inflation. He didn't give a figure, but he said it will be too expensive. David T.C. Davis was the following guest, the UK Government Secretary of State.
And said the money's on the table.
And he said, if it's about money, come and talk to us. So it does put it back on the table, and that will give a huge amount of relief to a lot of people on one side of the argument. On the environmental side, there'll be lots of people going, oh no, not here we go again. So it wasn't a definitive, yes, I'm reconsidering, every word is back up again. Ken Skates caveated it. There isn't money. We know that there isn't Welsh Government money, and we know that if whoever takes over after the general election in the UK, they haven't got pots of money either. So money, it is money that's the problem, but that's a different message to what we were getting even a few weeks ago.
And Matt, finally, we're almost out of time, but one of the kind of big headline changes was this change from ministers to cabinet secretaries. We've seen it before, but what's it all about?
I have absolutely no idea, and
It feels like it's there just to trip up journalists.
Well, yeah, in the chattering classes, I think, just on Thursday evening, despite all the many actually interesting changes, the thing that I kept getting texts about is why on earth have they gone back to cabinet secretary? So I don't know. Maybe someone was offered a ministerial job and they've just bumped it up from deputy minister, so they can say they got a ministerial job instead. I don't know.
Well, we are none the wiser in that. Matt Hexter, thank you so much, and to you, Ruth Mosalski, for coming in.